What did Zelenskyy tell you?
What? Sorry?
What did Zelenskyy tell you?
About what?
How did he tell you anything as to whether he can talk with Putin, not talk with Putin? Is there a possibility?
No, look, what Zelenskyy told us stays between Zelenskyy and us.
Good morning, Dr. Jaishankar. Always nice to have you with us, and welcome to the first edition of the ET World Leaders Forum. You've been around now from Ukraine to Singapore. Now we have you in Delhi, all in a space of a week or so. My question, how was the train ride?
I could have done with a Vande Bharat. It was about 10 hours each way, and I think given the situation, obviously, you got what you got, but 10 hours is 10 hours.
When was the last time an Indian Prime Minister took a train to visit a country? We've heard of, the image of Nehru in a yak is there.
Well, I remember Mr. Modi doing a Shinkansen, a bullet train in Japan. I'm trying to think, I offhand cannot remember any other train ride, at least for a long time.
So that was a crisis point, current crisis point in the global picture as you see it. There are many such crisis points. The world is in turmoil and you've been talking about it. Everybody has been talking about it. How would you paint the picture as an Indian foreign minister?
The global picture?
Yeah.
Well, look, I think if I were to have a one-word summary of this situation, it's probably the first word which you've used for the panel, which is risks. Because what we have seen really for the last 15 years is a steady increase in terms of risks in to the global order, in the international economy, in individual countries. Now, there are a number of reasons for it. There are different kinds of risks. You would say, okay, as climate change has accelerated, there's a set of risks out there. We saw a once-in-a-century pandemic. That was a risk. That was a super black swan. But there are risks which are coming actually out of the process of change. Because there's global change, and change by nature is disruptive. And you spoke about Ukraine. That's an example, not the only one. So if there's a major war going on in Europe, there's a huge conflict going on in West Asia and the Middle East. There are tensions around Asia. There's a revival of border territorial claims and border frictions. Those are actually, with each one of them, the risks mount. There are risks to supply chains today, not just Houthis in the Red Sea. It could be climate risks, there could be pandemic risks. There are technology risks. The idea that, there are borders and borders are some kind of hard line and problems can be stopped on that side of the border, I think those days are over. So look at it any which way. To me, every government, consciously or otherwise, is today assessing risks, and the majority of policies are on de-risking. That sounds a bit defensive. There's other aspects. The ones who do it better have the ability then to explore opportunities, but the focus of the world is in de-risking.
Part of the core decision making of this government, what is our strategy? Is it a mitigation strategy? Is it a leveraging strategy? Or is it just a managing strategy?
In a kind of way, it's an all of the above. But if you manage it well, if you de-risk it well, then you have many other options. I just kind of turn you back to the COVID era. Okay, there were countries. I mean, everybody came out of the COVID badly. Those who came out less badly came out well. Now, I think we were among the countries who, largely because we followed our own, our own understanding of our own society and didn't listen too much to free advice which we were getting in large quantities, we actually took a number of steps during that period which allowed us to come out much better out of COVID than the rest of the world. In a way, you could say that, I mean, to me, one big lesson out of COVID was health security, food security, manufacturing security. Okay. Now, a lot of our policies today, when you say make in India, it's part of de-risking. When you say that, look, we will produce our own vaccines, and, at that time many people questioned it. That's also part of de-risking. When we sometimes, intervene to ensure that our food markets are stable, that too is part of de-risking. Now, if you've done a good job in de-risking, then you can actually have the luxury to explore other opportunities. So because I think we have done decently out there, we are today, let us say, exploring opportunities, trying to get involved more in global supply chains, looking at, say, domains like semiconductors, where historically, which we have neglected, we are now sort of wading into it very, very seriously. Looking at really the sunrise sectors, looking at EVs, looking at renewables, looking at drones, looking at space, looking at AI. All those you can do if you've done that basic de-risking. If we had not succeeded so well, I think we wouldn't have the bandwidth or the attention span to actually look at other areas.
Here there's another view that had the pandemic not happened and we had taken a growth trajectory, this minus the pandemic, we've not reached that growth trajectory yet. This year's economic survey also points out to FDI flows dropping, and that's been an issue. There is this whole view that we should relook at our China approach, maybe allow some of the FDI to come in, remove those barriers, not be so stringent with visas, and look at maybe some of the low middle-end supply chain opportunities which are coming from there. Your views, sir, because you have the security picture at hand as well.
No, look, to say what would I have done had the pandemic not happened to me is a waste of time. The pandemic happened. So why speculate about what could have happened? So now that it has happened, and everybody is looking at a post-pandemic recovery, and not just a post-pandemic recovery, there are many other factors. I mean, the global environment has changed. I mean, the very sharp competition between the United States and China today is the dominant feature of the global environment. It has consequences for the international economy. It has deep consequences for the technology world. So these are real factors. Now, you can't build policies around, I wish that had not happened and I would like to go that way. So I take what has happened as a given. Now, in that given, your question on China. Look, China in many ways is a unique problem because it is a unique polity, it is a unique economy. And unless one tries to grasp that uniqueness and understand it, I think the judgments, the conclusions, and possibly the policy prescriptions flowing out of it can be problematic. It's not just an Indian problem.
Are you referring to the economic survey?
No. I'm referring to the world's response to China. If today people are complaining about trade deficits with China, and we are too, why is that? Because decades ago, we all consciously chose to overlook the nature of Chinese production and the advantages which they enjoyed in a system where they got a level playing field with all the advantages that they brought to bear. So My point is there is a general China problem. I mean, do remember, Pranab, we are not the only country in the world which is having a debate about China. Go to Europe and ask them, what is today among your major economic or national security debates? It's about China. Look at the United States. It's obsessed with China, and rightly so in many ways. So the fact is, let's not make out as though it's only India which has a China problem. India has a China problem, a special China problem. That's over and above the world's general China problem. So my point is, when you look at this, when we approach the issue of China as a whole, Chinese trade with China, investment from China, exchanges of various kinds with China, we have to, if you neglect to take into account that this is a very unique country with a very different way of working, I think your basics start to go off track. So once you understand that, because there is a general problem with China as well as our own situation, I mean, all of you know we have a very difficult situation in the border for the last 4 years. I think the sensible response to it is to take the precautions which a country like India should be taking. Now, it has never been the government's position that we should not be having investments from China or doing business with China. It is that investment, because we are largely talking investments here. When it comes, trade is a different matter. I mean, I'm happy to talk about why we should be manufacturing more. But on the investments issue, I think, to me, it's common sense that investments from China would be scrutinized. I think the border and the state of relations between India and China call for it. But I think even if countries who do not have a border with China are scrutinizing investments from China. I mean, Europe doesn't have a border, America doesn't have a border, but yet they're doing that. So the fact is, the issue is not do you have investment from China or not. It's not a yes or no answer. It is what should be the appropriate level of scrutiny, how should you handle it. And when you look at that, sometimes, when I read stuff, including in your newspaper, where people say, we should clearly identify this is national security. It doesn't work that way anymore. Because what is national security itself has expanded. I mean, tell me, if we were completely reliant, let us say, on pharmaceuticals from China, does it not have national security implications? If your telecom is, based on Chinese technology, can you be impervious to it? So it's not like, there is a clear identification of this is a yes and that is a no. It's a much more complex factor. And in my view, at a certain level with certain countries in certain situations, the line between economics and security is a very thin line. So I wouldn't, sharpen this and make it a kind of a yes or no, we should, be allowing them open door, or we should close the door. It's nobody's case that either of those two options should be there.
So I'll put it a more direct question. There has been a lot of talk about taking a relook at Press Note 3. Do you think Press Note 3 is serving us well? Is it lived its time, needs a relook? Or what's your assessment?
No, I think I answered that question. The question is, in my view, should investments, a country like India, in a competitive age where where technologies can be leveraged, investments can be leveraged, market shares can be leveraged, I think a country like India, and this is not necessarily an answer limited to China, I think a country like India must look at the investments that are coming in. Not necessarily negatively, but you must scrutinize it. You must have some sense of what is coming in which sector. You cannot be hands-off and say, well, the market will take care of it, or this will be great because there will be more production. There should be. I mean, I'm pro-investment. I'm pro-growth. But I do think somewhere there should be a balance.
Some feel that the US narrow yard, high fences has worked better? Where would you, how differentiated are we? Or are we somewhere in the similar?
No, look, the US is the US. I would not extrapolate their situation, because the US and China are engaged in a different competition. It is a competition for, in a sense, you can say, for global primacy or global leads. And it has many dimensions to it. Our situation is very different. Our situation today is, for years, I've actually, in the name of globalization, allowed, foreign players advantages in my home economy to the detriment of my domestic players. That is the reality. And I think that is something which we need to address. I mean, I genuinely believe that, at the end of the day, we cannot just say these are our bottom lines, this is most, L1 is from China, or, these are the most competitive. All that works, I understand that. I mean, I've had a brief exposure to business myself. But I think there is a larger, even business has a social obligation. And there is an obligation to Indian workers. There is an obligation to our small businesses. We cannot be hollowed out in the name of efficiency and globalization. I think that's a very dangerous thing to advocate.
I'll move you on a little bit to the wider neighborhood, our closer neighborhood. We all are aware of the multiple crisis point. We know what has happened in Bangladesh. You had a very good statement this morning in the newspapers on Pakistan. Here's my ask to you. Something which has not been talked about much. For the last decade, and you've been involved at various levels, you've used economic levers with the neighborhood. Has that given you better options as you deal with these crises now? And how integrated have you actually been able, because we hear these stories about the power grid, about connectivity. How is it really working in terms of policy options? Has there been a real change? Be honest about that.
Let me come back to de-risking. Okay? What happens when you have multiple neighbors and, by definition, relationships with neighbors are very complicated. They're all democratic polities. Governments will change. There will be political debates in their country. Often we will be the center of those debates. It's natural. We are a big country. So we have to expect and plan for and build into our policy making an expectation that there will be changes, some more organic, some more disruptive in our neighborhood. How do you then deal, how do you stabilize? Because I'm now de-risking the neighborhood. Okay. You do that by creating the factors of stability. If two countries are linked by, let us say, a power grid, actually you have secured both ends. One is a producer, one is a customer, both have an interest in keeping it going. If you have a fuel pipeline, the same logic applies. If you have more trade, if you have more tourism, let's say, take Bangladesh. There's a lot of medical tourism which happens out of Bangladesh. Okay, the patients benefit there, the industry benefits it. So the whole point is, for the last 10 years when we've been talking about neighborhood first, the entire exercise is about making sure that there are so many connections in so many domains which are so indispensable, which are so deep, which are so central to everybody's calculation, that the factors of volatility get relatively diminished. So whatever happens finally, people will say, okay, we may have those differences, but there's that reality out there. And I think that's good for us.
Are you seeing that change happening in Bangladesh with the interim administration? People are talking about extradition requests to arrest.
No, look, you are in the newspaper business. For you, it's a 24-hour cycle. I'm in the diplomacy business. For me, I'm prepared to wait at least a few months for anything to fructify. So, I think I would not be in a hurry to call out situations. And look, I'm not saying that to be evasive or diplomatic. I mean, I urge you to look, for example, at our relationship with Maldives last year. A year ago, people were predicting all kinds of things about our relationship. The fact is, the factors of stability at the end of the day kicked in. Look, let me tell you one thing. Our neighbors eventually do know. When COVID happened, they got their vaccines because of us. When Ukraine conflict happened, many of them got their fertilizers and their food grains because of us. When, difficult situations happen, ask Sri Lanka. I mean, had Sri Lanka waited for the IMF to deliver, God only knows what would have happened. The fact is, we stepped in much faster, much less conditional, and in much larger volumes. So, at the end of the day, the neighborhood today knows the realities. And I think it's important, look, if we invest in the neighborhood and the neighborhood invests in us, I guarantee you this would be a far more stable, predictable, resilient region. Because I expect this is going to be a very choppy decade. We're going to, because we have two big problems, don't think that's the end of it. We're still in the first half of the decade. So, if you are going to prepare for a very choppy existence, everybody is looking for ways of securing themselves. And these are ways of doing so. So, I think they value it as well.
I'm moving now a little beyond risks into opportunities, into how well are we sort of looking at leveraging these risks. As a country, what kind of reforms would this government look at, whether it is a domestic front or in any other way, to revive trade, become the natural alternative of stability in the world? There's a great opportunity through all of this. Do you think as a government you've done enough? More needs to be done? Domestically?
No, Pranab, you can never do enough. Okay? But if you ask me, have we done substantially, progressed in terms of preparing for the opportunities? I would say yes, but I would say again, it would be a caveated yes, because I would say there's much more that awaits us. I mean, if you just look at the last few days, okay? You've had this announcement of 12 industrial clusters across the country. You've had an announcement of many more roads and railway lines. Okay. You've had announcements of major deep water ports in this country. So the fact is, if one were to clinically, and this is not a politically colored analysis, if one were to think back about where have there been shortcomings on our part nationally, I think our infrastructure development was way, way behind what it should be. Our focus on manufacturing was not what it should be. Our support for agriculture was not what it should be. I think each one of these is being rectified. Now, you can't cold start something. You can't come in on 2014 and say, I want to change everything and I'll take it from second gear to fifth gear at one go. It's going to be, there's going to be a kind of build-up. And my sense is, as we hit the third term, a lot of the homework, the preparation, the experience, the relationships, the confidence which we have built up will all kick in. And, when you say, I agree with you. I mean, on the, one of the problems with de-risking is it sounds defensive and it can make you defensive. A country like India should not be defensive. I think we should today be looking at global opportunities. And I see today that the reworking of supply chains as a major global opportunity. I see new businesses. We have to leapfrog. That today, even on semiconductors, for example, there's a debate in this country. Should we be investing in this sector or not? The fact is, if you say, well, that investment is very big because I still have those problems to attend, that means you will always be behind the curve. You will be 25 years behind the world because you're still looking at 25-year-old problems to solve. So you have to figure out how to fix the legacy issues while also thinking ambitiously about the future. So, to me, whether it's the industrial clusters, whether it is a semiconductor push we are making, whether it is our desire to attract more, creating a more enabling environment for manufacturing, they come as a package.
But let me ask you a slightly political question. Has the outcome of the recent election slowed down the process for you, or has it delivered a message to actually hasten it? How are you guys seeing it in the government?
If you look between early June and we are now end August, just think back at all the decisions that have happened in these 3 months. I think you have the answer.
So the pace has quickened, you say?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So this is Vande Bharat plus plus.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Moving on from here, the other theme in this panel is the responsibility. And you've also been speaking about it at various places, that India should do more. I think one of going to Russia, going to Ukraine, even when the crisis in West Asia, you were in Iran, that's on the risk side. Is there more we look at? You're working on new scripts with the Quad, etc. Without, taking a broad brush at all of this, what kind of role are you telling the world India can play?
First of all, I think there are two kind of preparatory points here. One, should we be doing more? Because I don't think there is a deep awareness in this country or a deep consensus in this country that we should be doing more. I think there are obviously people who believe that. There are people who are more skeptical. Sometimes they attribute political coloring to what we do. So here's a very, very simple point. Today we are the 5th largest economy. Let's say end of the decade, maybe we'd be 3rd. You cannot have the same contribution to global welfare as number 3 in the world, which you had when you were number 11 or 12 in the world. It's a very simple proposition. Our stakes in the world are higher. Our capabilities are greater. The expectations of the world are different. And our interests are there. Now, often they merge. It's not either or. If you look today at the Middle East, we sent a lot of ships to the Arabian Sea when those attacks were happening. In fact, at one point, I think after the United States, we were probably the biggest deployment out there. Now, I put it to you, look, our trade was at stake, but the region's trade was at stake as well. And somebody had to step forward and help with the stabilization. So the idea that, there are bigger powers out there, or, the problem's going to be taken care of and I don't need to worry about it, I think that era is over. One part of it is we've become bigger. The other is others, those on whom the world historically relied on, particularly the United States, I think they are also much more stretched today. So we have to be realistic about what, let us say, we could expect from others in such a situation. I often compare it, to the tsunami. In 2004, when we had the tsunami in the Indian Ocean, a very large part of the response actually came from outside the Indian Ocean. It was led by the US, but you had Europe and you had Japan, you had Australia. We were there very prominently. Today, God forbid, something like that happens. I think the responses will largely be out of the region itself, because I'm not sure the others have the capability and the inclination to do what they did 20, 30 years ago. So I do think, as part, when we speak about, let us say, the rise of India, we must have a parallel conversation. We must grow our capabilities, but side by side, if we are getting so much out of the world, we must also have a conversation side by side. What are we doing for the world and with the world?
I think we all are running out of time, but just this thing about how are you de-risking yourself from the US presidential elections?
No, I have no risks.
Do business with anyone. And absolutely the last question. What did Zelenskyy tell you?
Sorry?
What did Zelenskyy tell you?
About what?
How did he tell you anything as to whether he can talk with Putin, not talk with Putin? Is there a possibility?
No, look, what Zelenskyy told us stays between Zelenskyy and us.
That's it. On that note, thank you, Dr. Jaishankar. Always a pleasure having you over. Thank you.